My brother demanded I skip my master's graduation to babysit his kids in Hawaii so he could relax. When he called my degree a hobby, I didn't just refuse. I silently canceled the luxury suite booked in my name, leaving them stranded. Before we begin today's story, we have an urgent announcement. Due to technical issues, this channel is shutting down. But don't worry, the stories continue. Please subscribe to our new channel, Daily Drip Stories. You can find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag on this video. Make sure to switch over now so you don't miss out. Thank you for your support. Now back to the story. The cursor on my laptop screen blinked at me, a rhythmic, mocking pulse that seemed to match the throbbing headache behind my left eye. I had been staring at the same paragraph of my thesis regarding sustainable urban microinfrastructure for 45 minutes, trying to find the perfect synonym for integration. My apartment was a disaster zone of coffee cups, sticky notes, and open textbooks. This was it, the final push. After 2 years of sleepless nights, budget noodles, and a level of stress that I was pretty sure had permanently altered my cortisol levels, I was 13 days away from the finish line. 13 days until I defended my thesis, and 14 days until I walked across that stage to accept my master's degree. I took a sip of lukewarm coffee, grimacing at the bitter taste, when my phone buzzed against the hard surface of the desk. The vibration rattled a stack of index cards, sending a few fluttering to the floor. I groaned, rubbing my temples, and glanced at the screen. It was Nalen. My stomach gave a small, involuntary lurch. Calls from my older brother were rarely just to say hello. They were usually requests disguised as opportunities or demands disguised as favors. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but the anxiety that he might be calling with bad news about mom or dad won out. I swiped right and put it on speaker. "Hey, Nalen," I said, my voice raspy from disuse. "Everything okay?" "Grace, good you picked up." Nalen's voice boomed through the tiny speaker, loud and brash. He sounded like he was in his car, the background hum of the highway audible. "Listen, we have a situation. A code red situation." I sat up straighter, the adrenaline spiking. "Is everyone okay? Is it the kids?" "What? No, everyone's healthy," he said dismissively. "It's the nanny. That girl, the one Emery hired last month, she just quit. Sent a text message an hour ago saying she couldn't handle the dynamic and blocked our numbers. Can you believe the unprofessionalism?" I let out a breath, slumping back into my chair. "Oh, that sucks, Nalen, I'm sorry. Finding childcare is tough." "It's not just tough, Grace, it's a disaster," he snapped, the stress leaking into his tone. "We fly to Maui in 3 days. This was supposed to be the baby moon before the new baby comes. We need this break. Emery is stressed out of her mind, and frankly, so am I. Work has been a killer this quarter." "I get it," I said, eyeing my word count at the bottom of the screen. "Maybe you can find a rush agency, or maybe ask Mom." "Mom can't do it, her hip is acting up. And I'm not trusting an agency stranger with Matthew and the toddler in a hotel room for 10 days, Nalen said. There was a pause, a heavy silence that I instinctively knew I shouldn't fill. "So, that leaves you." I blinked. "Me." "Yes, you. It actually works out perfectly," he continued, his voice gaining that smooth, sales pitch cadence he used in his board meetings. "You're a student, so your schedule is flexible. You can fly out with us, stay in the suite, on the pull-out couch, obviously, since we need the master, and watch the kids during the day and evenings so Emery and I can actually relax. We'll pay for your flight. It's a free trip to Hawaii, Grace." I froze. My brain tried to process the logistics, the dates, the sheer audacity. "Nalen, you said you're going in 3 days? That's for 10 days. "Yeah, 10 days of sun and sand. You'll love it." "Nalen," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "In 3 days, I have my final thesis review. In 10 days, I have my actual defense. And the day you get back, that's my graduation ceremony. I literally cannot leave the city. I am finishing my master's degree." There was silence on the other end. Not a contemplative silence, but an annoyed one. Grace, he sighed, the sound of a parent scolding a confused child. Look, I know you've been busy with your school thing, but this is real life. This is my family. I'm in a bind here. Can't you just email your professors and move it? Tell them it's a family emergency. Move my graduation? I asked, my voice rising an octave. Nolan, the university convocation is a fixed date. Thousands of people are attending. I can't just ask them to reschedule a ceremony because your nanny quit. You're being doctor. Amatic, he scoffed. Skip the ceremony then. It's just walking across a stage. They mail you the paper anyway. The defense, do it over Zoom from the hotel balcony. Who cares? I care, I shouted, the exhaustion finally snapping my patience. I have worked 2 years for this. I am not skipping my graduation to babysit Matthew while you drink my ties. Wow, Nolan said, his voice dropping to a cold, hard register. I offer you a free vacation, a chance to help your pregnant sister-in-law, and this is how you react? Selfish. I thought you cared about family, Grace. Clearly, I was wrong. The betrayal is honestly worse than the nanny quitting. He hung up. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in stunned silence, the blood pounding in my ears. I didn't know it then, but that dial tone was the sound of my life fracturing into before and after. For a long time after the call ended, I just sat there. The silence in my apartment felt different now, heavier, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on my arms stand up. I felt physically ill, a nausea that roiled in my stomach not from a virus, but from the sheer emotional whiplash. I tried to go back to my thesis. I highlighted a sentence, deleted it, retyped it, and then realized I had just written Nolan is a jerk in the middle of a paragraph about permeable pavement solutions. I slammed the laptop shut. I needed to move. I needed to pace. My phone dinged, a text from Emery. I can't believe you. That was it. No greeting, no question, just immediate judgment. My heart rate, which had just started to slow down, spiked again. I walked to the kitchen and poured the rest of the cold coffee down the sink, my hands shaking. The shaking wasn't just anger, it was fear. For my entire life, Nolan had been the sun around which our family orbit spun. He was the firstborn, the son, the corporate success story. I was the younger sister, the creative one, the one whose ambitions were treated with a pat on the head and a benevolent smile. Standing up to him didn't just feel rebellious, it felt dangerous. I needed to make them understand. Maybe Nolan had just been stressed in the car. Maybe if I explained the rigid academic protocols, the impossibility of rescheduling a defense, they would get it. I grabbed my keys and drove the 20 minutes to their house in the suburbs. It was a sprawling, modern build that screamed new money, gray siding, impeccable landscaping, and a driveway paved with expensive stone. When I walked in, the house was in chaos. Suitcases were open in the hallway, exploding with designer resort wear. Matthew, my 5-year-old nephew, was running laps around the kitchen island screaming at the top of his lungs, while the 3-year-old sat crying amidst a pile of rejected toys. Emery was in the living room, folding tiny floral outfits. She didn't look up when I entered. She was glowing with pregnancy, yes, but her face was set in a mask of cold fury. Emery, I started, stepping over a pile of floaties. I came to talk. She whipped a swimsuit into a suitcase with unnecessary force. There's nothing to talk about, Grace. Nolan told me you don't care if our trip is ruined. He told me you think your little school project is more important than my mental health. It's not a little school project, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It's my master's thesis, and I do care, but I literally cannot be in Hawaii. I have to be physically present to graduate. So don't graduate, she snapped, finally looking at me. Her eyes were icy. God, you are so rigid. Do you know how much this trip costs? Do you know how much stress Nolan is under? He provides everything for this family. The least you could do is show a little gratitude and pitch in. Gratitude? I asked, baffled. I pay my own rent, I pay my own tuition. I don't owe Nolan anything. He bought you that laptop, she pointed out, gesturing vaguely towards my bag. For my birthday, 3 years ago, I countered. Does that mean I own him my soul? Emery laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. You're unbelievable. You know, we were going to let you stay in the grand penthouse with us. Do you know how impossible it is to get that suite? It's sold out for months. We pulled strings, and you're throwing it back in our faces. I went cold, the grand penthouse. A memory flashed in my mind, sharp and clear. 6 months ago, Nalin complaining about the prices at the resort during peak season. Me, wanting to do something nice for them as a baby gift. Me, logging into Grandma's old timeshare account, the one she left to me because I was the only one who visited her in the nursing home during her final years. The points were substantial, a legacy accumulation from decades of ownership. We pulled strings, Emery had said. No, I had pulled strings. I had used my entire inheritance of points to book that specific suite for them as a surprise gift, putting the reservatio N under my name to authorize the points transfer, intending to add Nalin's name at check-in as a guest. Right, I said softly, a strange calm washing over me. The grand penthouse. Yeah, Emery sneered, turning her back to me. The best room in the resort, wasted on you apparently. She kept talking, listing my faults, my selfishness, my lack of vision. But I wasn't listening anymore. I was staring at the open suitcase, at the piles of expensive clothes, at the entitlement radiating off her like heat waves. They had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten who actually held the reservation. They thought the room was theirs by divine right, by virtue of Nalin's status. They didn't realize that without me, without my signature and my ID at the front desk, that reservation was just a ghost in the system. I should go, I said, backing away. Yeah, you should, Emery spat. And don't expect an invite to the baby shower. We don't need negative energy around the new baby. I walked out to my car, my heart no longer racing. It was beating slow, steady, and heavy. The sadness was there, deep and aching, but something else was rising alongside it. A steel spine I didn't know I had. To understand why this hurt so much, you have to understand the history. I wasn't just the little sister, I was the fixer, the shadow support staff of Team Nalin. When Nalin started his first business out of college, a dropshipping venture that failed spectacularly, I was the one who spent my weekends packing boxes in our parents' garage for free while he went out networking. When he needed a down payment for his first condo, I lent him $3,000 from my savings, money I had made waiting tables. He paid me back eventually, but without interest and without a thank you. He just assumed it was my duty. I had spent my 20s making myself smaller so Nalin could feel bigger. I celebrated his promotions, I bought thoughtful gifts for his kids, I listened to Emery complain about her haters on social media for hours. I did all of this because I believed that family showed up for each other. I believed that if the roles were ever reversed, if I was the one drowning, they would throw me a lifeline. But sitting in my car outside their McMansion, I realized the truth. They wouldn't throw a lifeline. They would probably ask why I was splashing so loud. Nalin was 32, a regional manager for a tech hardware supply firm. If you asked him, he was a high-level executive strategist. He wore suits that were slightly too shiny, drove a leased luxury SUV, and spoke in buzzwords. Synergy, drill down, bandwidth. He had curated a life that looked perfect on Instagram, but I knew the cracks. I knew he was leveraged up to his eyeballs in debt to maintain that image. That's why he needed the free babysitting. That's why he couldn't just hire a premium travel nanny from an agency for $5,000. He didn't have the liquidity. He needed free labor. He needed me. And then there was Emery. She had been a friend of a friend in college, sweet but vacuous. Marriage to Nalin had hardened her. She had morphed into a mommy influencer with a modest following, posting curated photos of Matthew and their toddler, documenting their perfect chaos. In reality, she had zero patience for the chaos. She treated motherhood like a photo op and the actual parenting like a chore to be outsourced. I pulled up the contact for Matthew in my phone, my nephew. He was 5, brilliant and incredibly high energy. He had been kicked out of 2 preschools for biting. He wasn't a bad kid. He was bored and desperate for attention his parents were too busy curating to give him. I loved him. The thought of not seeing him for a while hurt. But the disrespect, it was a physical weight on my chest. My phone buzzed again. It was a group text. Nolan had created a chat named Hawaii Crisis Team, including me, Emery, and our parents. Nolan, Mom, Dad, just so you know, Grace is refusing to help us with the kids. She's choosing a school ceremony over family safety. Emery is in tears. We might have to cancel the trip. Emery, I'm just shocked. I thought she loved the boys. Mom, Grace, honey, is this true? Can't you do your school thing later? Poor Nolan really needs this rest. I stared at the screen, tears pricking my eyes. They were triangulating. They were spinning the narrative before I could even get home. They were using my parents, who were old-fashioned and believed the son was the patriarch, as weapons against me. Then a direct message from Nolan popped up, separate from the group. Nolan, fix this, Grace. You have until tomorrow morning to change your mind. If you don't bother coming for Christmas. And don't expect me to help you with job connections when you graduate with that useless degree. I read the message twice. Useless degree. Don't bother coming for Christmas. He wasn't asking anymore. He was threatening, he was. Trying to bully me into submission, just like he had when we were kids, just like he did with his employees. He saw me as an asset to be deployed, not a person with dreams. I looked at the text, then I opened my email app. I searched for Grand Walia Resort confirmation. There it was. Reservation holder, Grace last name guest name, TBD room type, Grand Penthouse Suite Ocean View status, confirmed. I tapped on the email. The cancellation policy was clear. Full refund of points if canceled 48 hours prior to check-in. We were at 72 hours. I wasn't an urban planner yet, but I knew a thing or two about demolition. Sometimes, to build something new, like a backbone, you had to tear down the rotting structure standing in your way. I didn't reply to the text. I didn't reply to the group chat. I put the phone down, started my car, and drove home. I had a thesis to finish, and I had a call to make. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity that was almost frightening. The emotional fog of guilt and familial obligation had lifted, burned away by the sheer heat of Nolan's text message. Useless degree. That phrase echoed in my mind as I showered, as I made coffee, as I sat down at my desk. It wasn't just an insult, it was a revelation. He didn't respect me. He didn't see my career as real. To him, I was just little Grace, a resource to be mined when convenient and discarded when actual priorities arose. If I caved now, if I skipped my graduation to wipe noses in Maui, I would be validating his worldview. I would be agreeing that I was secondary. I opened my laptop, but not to work on my thesis. Not yet. First, I needed to secure my position. I logged into the timeshare portal. The points balance was astronomical. Grandma had been a Platinum Elite member since the 80s, and she had hoarded those points for a trip of a lifetime she never got to take. When she passed, she left the account to me specifically because I had driven her to her dialysis appointments 3 times a week for 2 years. Nolan had been too busy with the startup back then. I clicked on the reservation. It was still there, glowing in blue, Grand Penthouse Suite. I called the resort directly. Aloha, this is Leilani at the Grand Walia Concierge. How can I help you? Hi Leilani, I said, my voice steady. My name is Grace. I have a reservation starting in 3 days. Confirmation number H992 Alpha. One moment. Ah, yes, Miss Grace, the Grand Penthouse, a beautiful choice. We have you down for 10 nights. Will you be adding any guest names to the reservation today? This was the pivot point. The moment I could have just added Nolan and been the good sister, the martyr. Actually, Leilani, I have a question. If I don't add a guest name and I don't show up to check in personally with my ID, what happens? Well, Leilani hesitated. If the primary reservation holder isn't present, we cannot issue keys to anyone else. It's a strict security policy for the penthouse level. Unless you formally transfer the booking or add them as a primary guest beforehand, they would be turned away. I see, and if I were to cancel? You are within the cancellation window, ma'am. You would get a full refund of your points. However, I should warn you, we are at 100% capacity for next week. If you release this suite, it will be snatched up by the waitlist instantly. You wouldn't be able to get it back. Okay, I said. Don't cancel it yet. I just wanted to check the policy. Understood. Is there anything else? Yes, one more thing. Do you have any record of a Nalan or Emery calling to confirm details on this room? Let me check the notes. Yes, actually. A Mr. Nalan called yesterday. He requested a crib and, oh my, he tried to upgrade the cabana rental, charging it to the room. My jaw tightened. He was already spending my money. He hadn't even asked if he could use the room, he just assumed ownership. Did you authorize it? No, ma'am. He isn't on the reservation. We told him the account holder would need to approve any charges. Good, thank you, Leilani. I'll call you back. I hung up. He knew. He knew the reservation was in my name, he knew he needed me to authorize things, yet he still treated me like a servant. He was banking on my passivity. He was banking on the fact that Grace never says no. I spent the next hour doing something I should have done years ago. I called the registrar's office at my university. I confirmed my graduation tickets. I confirmed the time of my defense. Then, I called my landlord and paid my rent for the next 2 months in advance, draining my savings, but ensuring I had a roof over my head no matter what threats Nolan made about cutting me off. Not that he paid my bills anyway, but he had influence with our parents who sometimes helped with car repairs. Then I went back to the group chat. It was filled with flying monkeys. Mom, Grace, please, Nolan is so stressed. Just do this for the family. Dad, it's 10 days, Grace. You can graduate next year. Emery, I'm packing Matthew's bag, assuming you're coming to your senses. I typed a reply, I deleted it, I typed another. No. Simple, direct. I hit send. The response was immediate. My phone rang. It was Nalan. I declined the call. It rang again, declined. Then a text. Nalan, we are coming over. Panic flared in my chest. My apartment was my sanctuary. I didn't want them here, filling my space with their loud voices and demands. But I also knew I couldn't hide forever. If I wanted to be treated like an adult, I had to stand my ground like one. I spent the next 30 minutes tidying up. I put my thesis notes in a neat stack. I put on a pot of coffee. I put on real clothes, jeans, and a blazer. It felt silly, dressing up for my brother, but it was armor. When the knock came, it was heavy, authoritative. I opened the door. Nalan stood there, looking flushed and angry. Emery was behind him, wearing oversized sunglasses and looking tragically put upon. You have some nerve, Nalan said, pushing past me into my small living room. He looked around with disdain, ignoring my calls, ignoring Mom. I answered, I said, closing the door but staying near it. I said no. No isn't an option, Grace. He spun around, his face red. The flights are booked. The resort is expecting us. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it would be to cancel now? I told my team I'd be offline. I told clients. Then go, I said calmly. Go to Hawaii, enjoy the beach, just watch your own kids. We can't, Emery shrieked, taking off her sunglasses to reveal perfectly applied makeup but genuinely red-rimmed eyes. I'm 6 months pregnant, Grace. I can't chase a toddler and a 5-year-old on the sand. I need to rest. That's the whole point of a baby moon. Then hire a nanny in Maui, I suggested. There are agencies. They cost $5,000 for a week, Nalan shouted. I'm not paying that when family can do it for free. And there it is, I said, crossing my arms. It's about the money. You want me because I'm free labor. You don't respect my time, you don't respect my degree. You just want to save $5,000. It's not just the money, it's the principle, Nalan argued, stepping closer, looming over me. Family helps family. We helped you. who drove you to move-in day freshman year, me. You were going that way anyway to see a girlfriend, I reminded him. That's not the point. The point is you are being selfish. You are choosing a piece of paper over your brother's mental health. He took a breath, switching tactics. He softened his voice, putting a hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy and condescending. Look, Gracie, I know you're stressed, but think about the future. When you graduate, eventually, who do you think is going to get you a job? The market is tough. You need connections. I know people in zoning and development. You help us now, I help you later. That's how the world works. It was a bribe wrapped in a threat. I don't need your connections, Nolan, I said, stepping out from under his hand. I already have a job offer. It was a lie, well, a half-lie. I had a second interview lined up, but he didn't need to know that. Bull, he scoffed. With an urban planning degree, please, you'll be working at Starbucks. Nolan, Emery interjected, looking at her watch. We don't have time for this. Just tell her she has to come. You heard her, Nolan said to me. Pack a bag. We pick you up at 6 a.m. on Tuesday. If you're not outside, I'm done with you. I mean it, Grace. I will cut you out. No more family dinners, no more seeing the nephews. You'll be a stranger to us. He waited for me to crumble. That was the old dynamic. He threatened exile, and I begged for inclusion. But I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a bully. A scared, cheap bully who was drowning in his own life and using me as a life raft. Get out, I said quietly. What? Get out of my apartment, now. Nolan laughed, a dark, incredulous sound. You're making a huge mistake. You're going to regret this. Maybe, I said, but not as much as I'd regret missing my graduation. He glared at me one last time, then turned to Emery. Let's go. She'll come around, she always does. They stormed out, leaving the door open. I walked over and slammed it shut, locking the deadbolt. My hands were shaking again, but this time, it felt like excitement. The next 48 hours were a siege. My parents called 6 times. My aunt called twice. Even a cousin I hadn't spoken to in 3 years messaged me on Facebook saying, "Heard you're bailing on Nolan? Not cool." Nolan had launched a PR campaign against me. He was spinning a story where he was the victim of a vindictive, selfish sister who was ruining his pregnant wife's health. But amidst the noise, I kept thinking about one thing, the reservation. They were still going. Nolan was arrogant enough. To believe I would cave. He was betting on me showing up at the airport on Tuesday morning. I checked the reservation online again on Monday night. Guest name, TBD. He hadn't even tried to call the hotel himself to add his name, probably because he knew he didn't have the account password. He was fully relying on me showing up at the check-in desk to hand over my ID. If I did nothing, they would fly to Maui. They would take a taxi to the Grand Walia. They would walk up to the desk and be told they couldn't check in. It would be a disaster. They would be stranded. Part of me, the old, pleasing part, wanted to warn him. Nolan, I'm not coming and you can't get in the room without me. Cancel the flight. But then I saw a new post on Emery's Instagram story. It was a video of her and Nolan clinking wine glasses. The caption read, "Finally relaxing. Dealing with toxic family is exhausting, but we aren't letting the haters stop our shine. Maui bound tomorrow. Baby moon living well is the best revenge." Toxic family, haters. They were publicly shaming me while planning to sleep in the bed I paid for. That was the breaking point. I looked at the clock. It was 8:00 p.m. on Monday. Their flight was at 9:00 a.m. Tuesday. The cancellation window closed at midnight. I picked up the phone and dialed the concierge. Aloha, this is Kai. Hi Kai, this is Grace. Reservation H992 Alpha. Yes, Miss Grace. We are looking forward to your arrival tomorrow. Actually, Kai, there's been a change of plans. I won't be able to make it. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Would you like to cancel? As Leilani noted, we have a very long wait list. I hesitated. If I canceled, the points went back to my account. Simple, clean. But then I thought about the wait list. I thought about the people who actually deserved a break. Kai, you mentioned a wait list. Is there anyone? Specific, maybe a family. Well, Kai lowered his voice confidentially. We have a couple here on their honeymoon. They booked a standard garden view, but there was a plumbing issue in their room, and we've been trying to move them, but we're fully booked. They've been very patient. Move them, I said. Excuse me. Move them into the grand penthouse. Upgrade them, my treat. Ma'am, that is an upgrade worth thousands of dollars. Are you sure? You would still lose the points. I'm sure. Consider it a wedding gift from a stranger. Just change the name on the reservation to theirs, right now, so that if anyone else tries to claim that room, say, a man named Nolan, it shows as occupied. You are incredibly generous, Miss Grace. I will do that immediately. The couple, Mr. and Mrs. Lay, will be over the moon. One more thing, Kai. If a Mr. Nolan last name shows up tomorrow claiming the room is his, please tell him the reservation was transferred by the owner. And tell him the owner said enjoy the lobby. I understood, ma'am. I'll make a note on the file. Thank you, Kai. I hung up. I sat back in my chair, listening to the hum of the city outside. I had just burned thousands of dollars worth of points. I had just declared war. But for the first time in my life, I felt light. I turned back to my thesis. I had a defense to prepare for. And tomorrow, while Nolan was discovering the consequences of his actions across the ocean, I would be practicing my opening statement. The day of my thesis defense was a blur of adrenaline and caffeine. I stood in a small conference room, wearing my best suit, facing a panel of 3 professors who had spent their careers dissecting urban theory. I presented my research on microinfrastructure with a passion that surprised even me. When the department head, Dr. Aristhorne, asked a grueling question about budget allocation models, I answered with a confidence I hadn't possessed 3 days ago. I realized then that standing up to Nolan had unlocked something. If I could dismantle the oldest, most terrifying authority figure in my life, a few academics were a walk in the park. I passed with distinction. As I walked out of the building, blinking in the bright afternoon sun, I checked my phone for the first time in hours. 17 missed calls, 32 text messages. It had begun. I scrolled to the first message from Nolan, sent 5 hours ago, which would have been noon in Hawaii time, right when they arrived at the hotel. Nolan, we are at the desk. They can't find the reservation under your name. Call me now. Nolan, Grace, pick up. This isn't funny. The kids are crying. Nolan, they are saying the room is occupied. By a Mr. Lee. What did you do? Emery, you are sick. You are actually sick. We have nowhere to go. Nolan, they want $1,200 a night for a standard room. We are in the lobby. Everyone is staring. Fix this. Then the voicemails. I played the most recent one. It was Nolan, but his voice wasn't the booming baritone of the corporate manager anymore. It was high, cracky. D and desperate. Grace, look, I'm sorry about what I said, okay? I'm sorry, just call the hotel. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them to kick the Lees out. We've been traveling for 9 hours. Emery is having contractions. Not real ones, but Braxton Hicks. Stress-induced. If anything happens to this baby, it's on you. Call me. I didn't call. Instead, I drove to my parents' house for the celebratory dinner they had planned for my graduation. A dinner Nolan had originally told them to cancel because Grace wouldn't be there. When I walked in, the atmosphere was funereal. My mom was pacing the kitchen. My dad was sitting at the table, looking grim. You did it, Dad said, not as a congratulation, but as an accusation. Nolan called. They are staying at a motel near the airport. A motel, Grace, on their baby moon. They could have stayed home, I said, putting a bottle of champagne on the table. I passed, by the way, with distinction. How can you talk about school? Mom cried, wringing her hands. Your brother is stranded. He says you gave away his room to strangers out of spite. I didn't give away his room, I corrected, my voice hard. I gave away my room, the room I paid for, the room he felt entitled to steal while insulting me. "He's family," Dad shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "You don't do this to family." "And family doesn't tell you your degree is useless," I shouted back, the dam finally breaking. "Family doesn't threaten to cut you off for not being a free nanny. Family doesn't try to bully you into missing the most important day of your life." The room went silent. They had never heard me yell. "I am done," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "I am done being the doormat. Nalan is a grown man. He makes 6 figures. He can book a hotel room. If he's in a motel, it's because he's too cheap to pay for a resort, not because of me. I am not his servant. I am his sister. And until he treats me like one, I am unavailable." I looked at them, my parents, looking small and confused, realizing for the first time that their family dynamic was built on a lie. "I'm going to go celebrate with my friends," I said. "I hope you can be happy for me one day." I turned and walked out. 2 days later, I walked across the stage. The auditorium was packed. When they called my name, Grace last name, Master of Urban Planning with distinction, the applause was loud. My friends were there, screaming my name. My parents were there too, sitting in the middle row. They looked uncomfortable, but they were there. Nalan and Emery were not. They were presumably still in the motel in Maui, or perhaps on an early flight back, nursing their sunburns and their bruised egos. I didn't hear from Nalan for a month. When he finally reached out, it wasn't an apology. It was an email. A formal, stiff email asking for the contact info of the resort manager because he wanted to file a complaint about the reservation mix-up. I didn't reply. However, the fallout had shifted the tectonic plates of our family. My parents, forced to actually listen to my side of the story without Nalan there to shout over me, had started to come around. They didn't fully understand. They were still of the generation where you sacrifice everything for family, but they respected me. They stopped asking me to run errands for Nalan. They stopped asking me to apologize. 6 months later, I got a job, not through Nalan's connections, but through my own. I was hired by a firm in Chicago specializing in sustainable city centers. I moved away. The distance was good. It allowed the wounds to scar over. I eventually saw Nalan again at Christmas. He looked tired. The baby moon disaster had apparently been a wake-up call for Emery, who had realized that without me as a buffer, Nalan's incompetence and cheapness were impossible to ignore. They were in therapy. He cornered me in the kitchen while I was getting eggnog. "So," he said, swirling his drink, "Chicago, huh?" "Yep, Chicago. Big city, tough market. I'm doing okay." He looked at me, really looked at me. He looked at the suit I was wearing, the confidence in my posture. He opened his mouth, probably to make a snide comment to minimize me again. But then he closed it. He looked down at his glass. "The motel had cockroaches," he muttered. I couldn't help it, I laughed. "Did it?" "Yeah," he let out a short, dry chuckle. "Emery screamed for an hour." "I bet." We probably shouldn't have asked you to skip graduation," he said. "It wasn't I'm sorry. It wasn't I was wrong. But for Nalan, it was a mountain moving." "No," I said softly, "you shouldn't have." "Right, well," he cleared his throat. "Good luck in Chicago, Grace." "Thanks, Nalan." He walked away. I watched him go, feeling a profound sense of peace. I hadn't just won a battle over a hotel room. I had won my life back. I had drawn a line in the sand, and for the first time, everyone had stayed on their side of it. I took a sip of eggnog and smiled. The best view wasn't from a penthouse in Hawaii. It was from right here, standing on my own 2 feet.